I'm Prim Seripaprat, and you are watching Chopping It Up with C-Buck.
On this edition of Chopping It Up with Buck, I have a good friend of mine, Prim Seripaprat. And I love saying her name because I say it once and then I'm just going to call you Prim. I remember the first time we worked together at college football, first take, we would laugh because it would be myself, her, and Jonathan Vilma. And she was always stirring the pot, but I knew how to get her on my side. So glad to have you on the show, Prim. We've been doing this and great episodes, and glad to have you because, you know, it's interesting. Part of this is my Kevin Tolbert, my producer, and I were talking one day, and I was sitting out on the back porch just saying, man, what can we do? It's COVID. We're just in these situations where we have so much time. And he said, you ought to just start having conversations with people. Okay. So we took it that next step and said, okay, how could we do it? And what's the format? We'd like to be live at some point. This would be great to be able to sit across from people. But since this is a new way of doing it, it triggered the things that you and I talked about months ago. And now we're here. So glad to have you on. Happy to see you, and how are you doing?
Oh, it's so good to see you, C-Buck. Yeah, I mean, I'm doing really well. I mean, I know you and I have kept in touch over the years. It's funny how our conversations have really changed. We started with, as you said, a little trash talking, although it was me kind of like trying to preempt the trash talking between you and Vilma.
Well, it was easy because you know we were going to go back and forth anyway.
Yeah, Vilma's no shortage of words either. So, I mean, we had such a good time on that show. And then you and I have talked over the years about just our place in broadcasting. And then we talked about school, you and I being on a 10-year plan, doing the graduate school thing, and then mental health. And you came on my show and we talked about your path. And then now it's going to be really interesting to see what this conversation is like, because you and I, we know we're on the same page, I think, on a lot of things, but it's interesting to see really like race, politics, sports, everything. I mean, it is coming at a full collision right now in ways that we've just never seen before. So, I mean, I've been fine. The short cliche answer is like, yeah, I'm good. The real honest conversation is I'm going through a massive transformation. I think things are bubbling up to the surface that I've never addressed or thought about. I've been talking to my parents. I've been talking to my husband. I've been talking to my friends. Yeah. It's deep. Mm-hmm. That's the only way I can put it.
Well, it's interesting. I want to take you back to your parents. I'm glad you brought them up. They moved to Mexico, Missouri in their 20s from Thailand, right? And I just found that interesting, and just kind of tell us a little bit about that, because that'll help us kind of when we talk about some of the things that you're saying are bubbling up for all of us. Some of the things that are just giving us some anxiety, but also hope that we can change some of this stuff. Tell us a little bit about that move and you growing up in a Mexico, Missouri, in the middle, the heartland of the country.
Home of Tai Lu. More home to Prim Seripaprat first and then Tai Lu. So I'm second generation Thai American. I was born in Mexico, Missouri. My parents immigrated over here after they got married at the age of 25, the only members of their family to come over to the United States. And they started out in Missouri, and then my dad ended up going to graduate school, and my mom as well, in Oklahoma. So, and they came over here because they were just looking, just like anybody else, any other immigrants, they were looking for a better life, and they knew that there were greater opportunities over here, especially within the world of education. And they weren't planning to stay here in America, but opportunities kept on popping up. And so my dad went to medical school at University of Oklahoma. He was the first foreign student in the OBGYN department back in the 60s. And the story goes that he went back to St. Louis to do his residency. He worked at the ER, was working out of East St. Louis, said that on average, he probably stitched people up. I think it was total of like 30 people a day or something crazy. I mean, it was averaging like 6 people per hour. It was really intense. But anyways, decided to stay in OBGYN and wanted to open up his own practice. And so opened up a map, drove to all these different cities, and Mexico, Missouri did not have an OBGYN practice. And that where the Seripaprat story in America began.
That is, I mean, it's cool because it's, we talk about America being a land of opportunity, but, you think of your family coming from Thailand and starting, and your dad, just kind of find, and I love to hear those stories because so oftentimes we say, well, why did you end up there? How did your family end up there? Or, how did they get to this point? And that's really cool. The one thing too, I think growing up, you were a really talented athlete and musician. I know you played the piano, you were a gymnast, you did, just did everything, right? What was your favorite part? Which one did you like the best, or which one, if you had, if you could put a finger to it to say, I really like this sports more than music or music more than sports?
Had you asked me this 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I would have said tennis. Asking me now as a 39-year-old, I would say that I wanted to please people and I just wanted to achieve excellence.
Okay.
That was the thing that I was constantly striving for. Is so I was very obedient in the fact of like, you put something in front of me, I wanted to excel and I wanted to please my parents. I wanted to please my teachers and coaches. So that's just kind of what happened. And I ended up, with that type of personality, I ended up doing well in a lot of things, but merely because I'm a perfectionist and very achievement oriented with the focus of wanting to please other people.
Yeah.
So.
How long, I mean, and I know that hasn't always helped you. How has that hurt you in being a people pleaser?
Man, I mean, that's hard because then you're constantly chasing the expectations of others. And we all know that anytime we're not necessarily being true to us and we're trying to please everybody else, I mean, you're chasing after something that's just going to drive you crazy for the rest of your life. You can't please everybody. So, and I think then you add sport and being so deeply involved in tennis at such a young age and having a very intense childhood. Athletes are known for wanting to be people pleasers and they want to please their coaches, right? And that's a whole part of like being a really good elite athlete. You have to be very coachable and you want to be able to please in that sense. So I think that was a huge downfall of mine. I would say probably in my probably more in my 20s is where I started to really struggle with that. It was just more of internal conflict, I would say. Just a lot of pain, especially when sport was no longer in my life. So it manifested itself in many ways.
Yeah, but I think the thing that it's also helped you were a child prodigy. You talk about that, playing tennis at an early age, moving to Tampa, playing in the Saddlebrook Prep Academy, which was a school that was just all kind of folks, Jennifer Capriati, Andy Roddick. I mean, you hear all these names. You were in the thick of that. Martina Hingis. Tell us about that experience and how that shaped you, because I've often laughed how smart you are, but some of the things I'm serious. Valedictorian in high school, but the learning agility. Sometimes people are really smart, but they only get the book side of it. You have a sense of, I got sports, I got music, and I can spar with you if I need to, but I can also kill you with kindness and just break you down, and you don't even know I'm breaking you down. Is
that what people say about my show? I break you down with kindness.
Well, but you do. You get, we'll talk about what you did to me to actually open, get me to be a little bit more vulnerable, because that wasn't an easy thing. That's not always an easy thing when, like you said, you're used to being judged. But being in an environment like that, where you're constantly against some of the top players in the country, in the world, actually, what was that experience like for you?
It was intimidating. It was scary. It was important. It was impactful, influential. I mean, so many different things wrapped up in one. Looking back, on one hand, the positives outweigh the negatives, obviously, or they're not necessarily negatives. They're challenges to deal with as a 12-year-old, some may not be equipped to handle. But the positives were, listen, I lived a very privileged life, let's be honest. And getting that opportunity and the resources to be around some of the best tennis players in the world. And the funny thing is, a lot of these players that you just kind of mentioned, Jennifer Capriati and Hingis, they were already #1 in the world by the time they were there and I started training with them. But the Marty Fishes, Andy Roddick, some of these other players, they were not who they were only 12. We were all 12, 13, 14 years old. and we all ended up evolving into something bigger. But it was extremely competitive. I mean, it was very intense. We were on the court about 5 hours a day, 6 times a week. And then within that, it was extremely competitive. So not only were you training to be the best that you could, but you were training right next to your best friend. And there was a lot of politics and competition. And I'm sure there's probably a lot of young athletes that could relate to that, maybe at the AAU level, or if they go to IMG Academy. So it was intense, and there were a lot of things that I learned from it in terms of work ethic, discipline, resiliency is really big. I mean, if you throw something at me, I feel pretty equipped to handle just about anything. But on the other hand, there were also some things where I didn't really understand rest or recovery. And so it was a mix of things, but nonetheless, overall, it was a good opportunity.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point. I've always thought that we go so hard that sometimes we don't know when to just take a break. And the one thing I had as a question for you, what's the coolest moment? I mean, you're there as a 12-year-old kid. You got all these high profile athletes like yourself. What was the coolest thing about that? I mean, when you just look back now and look at it.
No, I tell you what, it was when I believe I was 17 years old. So I was a junior in high school, and I was by far my best spring. And my coach was hitting with Jennifer Capriati, and Jennifer was hitting with Steven, her brother, who's we were very good friends in high school. And Steven, like any brother and sister do, they are very honest with each other. So Steven kept totally just kind of tanking, and balls were flying everywhere. He was just off his rhythm.
Yeah.
And Jennifer just yelled at him and got so mad and like just kicked him off the court. And Jimmy's like, "Prim, get over here." And I was 17 years old, and she was #1 in the world at that point, and for many years. So that was a very surreal moment, because arriving at the academy at 12 years old, and then several years later, being able to spar one-on-one with her, who had won multiple Grand Slams, and she was won a gold medal at the age of 12 or 13, 14. That was a very surreal moment. And when you get that opportunity and that privilege to play alongside somebody who you look up to, and you've looked up to for so long, you realize that, like, if I'm with this person, maybe there's plenty of opportunity for me, because I'm getting to be here, And so I ended up having my best junior tennis tournament a couple weeks later, because I was there training for what's called the Easter Bowl. And because of that tournament, I was able to, my ranking shot up to top 5 in the country. And in my opinion, I think that's why I was able to get on the radar for programs like Duke and whoever else. So yeah, that's probably my favorite moment.
Yeah. And tell us about that, going to Duke and playing tennis there, and having a nice career there. I think by your senior year, you were starting to run into some injuries, but before that, you really were doing well playing at a high level at a competitive university like Duke.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was really hard. I'm not going to lie. I tell this to student athletes all the time. Like, you're going to have a lot of fun. It's going to be unlike any other experience you will ever have for the rest of your life. And it is such a privilege. Like, when I sat down with Gabby Reese, she said, it is a miracle. Like, remember that you are a miracle, because I think the percentage is only 2%, 2 or 3% of high school athletes get to go and play at the NCAA level. So it was a huge opportunity. I knew Duke was a good fit for me, because they focus on athletics and academics. But on the other side, it was a really big challenge for me. My freshman year, like my stomach turns into knots just thinking about it, because you go from being the star in high school and for a lot of us in the country, and then you go there, and I was just like, I was nobody, because everybody else was top 5 in the country and better and more. And you had other, some of the students there were so geniuses running around, and you had to go to Duke basketball team. I was very overwhelmed, and there were a lot of times when I doubted myself, like, I don't know if I belong here. I was terrified to speak up in class because I was afraid I was going to say something stupid. I was afraid to look ignorant. So it was a wonderful experience. I loved the Duke family, but it wasn't easy.
Yeah. Well, and you talked a little bit about that when you walked away from the game because of injuries. You know, you've said this before, that you've had eating disorders
Yeah.
around that. How has that manifested itself, and how have you become healthier with that? I know that was one of the reasons why you wanted, after your ESPN career, to start playing tennis again. But take us back to that time when you said it was starting to happen, when you were young and still not sure, especially after playing. You had to walk away from sports.
Yeah, I think so. When it first started was when I was in high school and 18 years old, and no surprise, at the moment sport was taken out of my life, that's when things started to change. And I had suffered 2 stress fractures right in my back right before I came to Duke, and I was going to be out for 4 months, which was terrifying to me, for somebody who practiced nearly every single day, 365 days a year. So for those that know, it's all about control, right? I wanted to have control over my life. And anytime tennis was out of my life, and especially it really erupted when I was at Duke, because now you're on a team. And in some ways, some things are a little bit subjective as well as objective. So we have a lineup 1 through 6 in singles for tennis in college. And I was playing 5 and 6. And then other times by my sophomore year, I wasn't on a team. And that was really hurtful to my ego and self-esteem, because to go from the star and then feeling like I'm not playing, I'm not contributing to this team, it made me feel really just kind of bad about myself. So then I started relying on other coping mechanisms to give myself something of value. Like what is my value right now if I'm not playing for this team? And so what ended up happening is, when I look on the scale, you know, if I have a goal and I meet that goal, it's like, okay, I know I did that for myself. That number tells me that I am something, and then I have some sort of control in my life. Obviously now I know that's just an illusion, and that's not true. And, you know, over the course of 10 years, I had to retrain and deconstruct that to tell myself that's not the truth.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back with Prim Seripaprat on Chopping It Up with Buck.
Many people are looking for natural alternatives to help ease their aches and pains. Begin stopping the pain with the help of Pain Stopper. Formulated by healthcare providers, Pain Stopper helps alleviate a variety of physical ailments so you can get back to doing what you love. Our products are triple independently lab tested to ensure the highest quality hemp available. Visit PainStopCBD.com for more information. Pain Stopper, because why manage pain when you can stop it?
At Heslop Wealth Advisors, our goal is to help small businesses develop quality retirement plans for their employees through our Lunch and Learn seminars. We provide lunch and learning tools to help your company succeed and unmatched customer service.
All right, we're back chopping it up with Buck, my good friend Prim. Prim, is, you know, I want to hear your story about getting to ESPN, because you were working as a producer. I mean, it's really cool, but the story is just neat because you wanted to get in front of the camera. You were working behind the camera. You were trying to get land the job. Tell us about how that happened, and just the whole way of you getting to ESPN, working after your tennis career and after your Duke career and all of those things.
Well, I'll try to condense the story. The moment I decided I wanted to get into TV was when my junior year at Duke, and I just had 3 surgeries, so my shoulder and both knees. So I was out for the year. And, you know, when an athlete is faced with that type of fate, you know that sport is eventually going to come to an end. So you really don't have a choice but to start thinking about the future. And it was actually one of my professors that suggested that I look into television just because of my personality, whatever. And it had never.
As a communication professor, or
no, actually, we don't have communications. We don't have journalism or communications at Duke. I was studying sociology and biological anthropology and anatomy. It was my it was my professor in biology that suggested like, hey, you should think about getting into television. I was like, well, and people at Duke at the time weren't really getting into media. It was either medical field, lawyer, politics, something of that nature. So I knew I wanted to stay in sports somehow. So you marry the two, TV, sports. I mean, ESPN is the place to go. So that spring break, since I wasn't traveling or playing with my team, I reached out to Duke alum Craig Lazarus, and I basically stalked him. And I was like, hey, I'm really interested into getting into this business. Can I just come check out ESPN and shadow you? Yeah. So it finally worked out. Flew myself up to Bristol, Connecticut. Back then, there were probably only, 5 buildings and 400 people back in 2001.
Yeah, wow.
And when everybody else was partying in Cancun, I was in Bristol, Connecticut, staying at the Clarion Hotel, where they still had green carpet back then. They've now since changed it. And shadowing Craig, a couple producers. I shadowed Linda Cohn for a night, and she gave me great advice. She said, listen, if you want to be on air, definitely do it. Don't come here, though. It's too big. Go to a small market, get your mistakes out of the way, and come join me. Because I believe she had told me that she worked in Greenville, South Carolina, in her earlier years. So I was like, cool. Somebody gave me the roadmap, and that's just what I did. And I started out in Raleigh, Durham as an intern making $8 an hour, intern, assignment desk editor, news producer, sports producer, learned how to edit, sports reporter, anchor. And then 9 years later, I got to ESPN. A decade later.
Yeah. So, Prim, it's interesting you bring that up because people always ask me, how do you get in it? And I said, I started doing some stuff with the Colts after I finished playing ball, started doing high school football, just really the way you have to kind of get through doing local college football games and all those things, if that's what you want to do. But you're right. You fly yourself up there. First off, you got to hustle and make sure you find the right person. And then if you can, sometimes you have to be persistent. And sometimes it's not as pleasantly persistent as you want to be. And then you got to do some things outside of what people say. So it's always interesting when I hear people's story about how they got there. Now, when you finally got to ESPN, what was that like? I mean, you're there. You're at the worldwide leader, and it's just like, lights on, boom. What?
Well, so in the in between story is interesting because I was at Miami at CBS, a local station, and I had just finished covering my first Super Bowl. Everything, I loved Miami and Florida girl, all that stuff. But I ended up getting laid off there after the economy crashed around 2008, and then there was a snowball effect. So I got laid off in 2010. So for about 11 months, I was kind of swimming around and trying to figure out what I needed to do. And so I was kind of dabbling. I was doing some sports radio stuff. I got into entertainment a little bit, was doing a little bit of modeling. I also was coaching tennis on the side. So I was in this position where I was like, I don't know what, I don't know if I'm going to get back into broadcasting. Like, I don't know what the landscape is because at that time, the economy had crashed and a lot of television stations were really, making their budget smaller. But ESPN was interested in me in July. I had gotten laid off March 17th. July, ESPN expressed interest there, but they're like, timing's not right. Flew myself up there in November for the first interview. Flew myself up again. They flew me up in December for the second round of interviews. And then it was about 355 days later, I was hired by ESPN.
One thing you made me think about when you were going through that time of not being, in broadcasting, you did, and you and I follow each other on social media. I saw you tweeting about some of the things that executives have told you, and it really blew my mind, but it didn't. I remember hearing it, but I think we get thick-skinned to that, and it's there, but you don't always hear. But tell us a few of those things that you heard coming up, trying to get in the business, about whether your hair was right or whether you were, your ethnicity. I can't say the word, but you're everything about, you. But they're saying it, well, I can't hire you because your name isn't this, or you know, all the things that you have put out. It's just been really fascinating to me to hear some of those now that we're looking at that and really identifying that it's not right. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in the 17 years that, and it's important to note that I've been in the business for a little bit, not to date myself, but because somebody was like, 17 years, like how old were you, 12? I'm like, no, I'm in my, 39. So it's important to note that some of these things did happen a little while ago, but nonetheless, they are in some ways are very inappropriate and shed light on the oppressive nature, not just of our industry and media, but just in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I was first wanting to get into the business, people would look at me with my long hair and say, it's too long, it's sloppy, it's too sexy, it's too feminine. You're going to have to cut it. You have to cut it to your shoulders, because back then, to be taken seriously as a woman, you had to have short, that helmet hair look. And that didn't make any sense to me. I was like, well, who cares what your hair looks like? Like, what does that signify? That should be an irrelevant factor. And then I was also told, well, Prim Seripaprat, your name is too ethnic. Americans aren't going to remember it. So I remember having conversations with people like, what would I change it to? Like Prim Smith, Prim Jones? Like, that's just awkward, And at the time, it was in some ways like racially, systematically appropriate to talk about that, because that's what the system was. But I chose to share some of those things now, because it's like, now is the time to shed light on some of those things where it shows the ineptitudes of our system and the inappropriateness and the oppressiveness, the prejudices, the stereotypes, the assumptions that we hold as people, particularly people with brown skin and historically marginalized groups. So yeah, your name's too ethnic, you're gonna have to cut your hair, you're a female, you don't know enough about sports. Like that assumption of, just because I'm a female, you don't know squat about sports, like nice. And this happened within the past several years, where didn't get the job, you're the wrong color brown. I was like, so what? I'm supposed to be darker? Because what were they? And are we not allowed to have a Black female and an Asian female?
Yeah.
Are there too many minorities? Like that stuff is, and that's just the interesting thing for me personally, to go through this evolution and be able to speak out. I know you saw my tweet where it is a risk for me to say some of those things, because by saying some of those things, and by saying TV executives have said that means that I'm kind of calling out the system and those people who said those things. But it has to be said, because if we don't point out what's wrong, people are never going to know that that's wrong. So it's been an interesting dynamic.
It is interesting, because you think about it, you talk about marginalized groups of people of color, but then they pit those folks against each other, even in those situations. Well, I didn't get the job because that person. And if you buy into that, that makes it even worse, because I think of it in those terms, just because, you and I were let go from ESPN at the same time, I think in 2017. And it was easy to get upset with this person or that person, but never for me was it about that, because having played sports, I know they can cut you at any time. But now that we're starting to see some of the things, and it's good that yourself, me, other people, even people internally now, you see them speaking out, whereas before there was always a thing, hey, we're not going to talk about this, we're not going to talk about that. But it's so prevalent that you have to talk about it, that you cannot allow that kind of stuff to happen. Now, you were going somewhere, and I think somebody, some man just blurted out some racist stuff to you as well, which, you and I were.
Drop the N-word. He dropped the N-word at 7:30 in the morning while I was pushing a stroller with my son. Like, that's just, and then to be able to do it while he's walking away. And I'm like, listen, like, bro, if you're going to say something, like, say it to my face. Don't walk away like a coward. And not that, confrontation or physical confrontation is really would solve anything, but the cowardice and the ignorance of it it was just astounding. And I was like, and you got the wrong racial slur. Like, you didn't get anything right. You know what I mean? I was just, it's
yeah, look, like I've said, they're saying, okay, everybody, if you're that color, you're like,
right.
you know, and that's interesting, Prim, because it's subsets of things. You know, when that happened in 2017, you know, when we got let go from ESPN, what was that like for you? Because I think it was good for me. It gave me an opportunity to look at a different side of myself. And I think you said that as well by even taking an attempt to start playing tennis again. You just kind of like, you found yourself and you found your voice, it seemed like, from what you were telling me.
Yeah. Yeah. At the time, you know, I was actually just showing this in my class, but let's see. So this is the day that I got laid off. I went to happy hour because, you know, we all needed drinks after that, after getting laid off. I went to happy hour with my husband, and this duck, for whatever, I don't know why, but they put it in my drink, and I somehow decided to keep that because I knew that I would look back at this moment and realize that I had come so far. And while it seems devastating and a huge hit to our ego, because, you know, getting kicked to the street and kicked to the curb by a company that is so large and prestigious like ESPN. And at that time, you know, growing up and during your and I's era, that like ESPN was the place to go and there's nowhere else, you know, and obviously that's changed with media and social media. But so it was a huge hit to my ego, but I also knew that I had been wanting to leave for a while and I just didn't have the gumption to leave. I had been thinking about school for a year, and I was almost at the point where I was trying to figure out how to tell them. I was so scared to tell them because in any really corporate America, maybe business where it's very intense and you're dealing with the best of the best, we have this thing in our American society where, God forbid, we want to dive into something else and that we have other interests, you know, and that's unfortunate. So, but it ended up working out, got laid off. And so as hard as it was, and on the surface, I want to point out that like on the surface, it looks like I really transitioned well and everything was great. But my husband will tell you, I definitely went through some very depressive moments. I mean, it wasn't easy, but on the surface, I got to play tennis. I got to play professional competitive tennis again. I made my comeback. I healed internally, surgery, moved to New York, go back to school, get my master's, starting my doctorate. More importantly, we have a kid. And honestly, none of those things, including having a kid, I don't think would have happened had we stayed in Connecticut and had I stayed at ESPN. Not even having a kid wouldn't have happened. No.
Now, the biggest thing about that, you said you wanted to tell them to leave. Was there some thought about maybe doing both, like going back to school and continuing to work? Or, you know, I mean, you know, I'm sure you walked through all of the process, but it didn't get to that. But were there some of the thoughts as well that you kind of like, I think I can do both, or try to at least attempt to do it because I like my job, but I really want to go to this other thing that's pulling me, so to speak.
Yeah. So I was looking at UConn. I was looking at Yale because those are, you know, 20 minutes away, 45 minutes away from ESPN. I was looking at online options because I knew that this other part of me was calling and I was being drawn to it. And I felt like my life purpose was starting to shift. You know, in 2001, when I was 21 years old, my goal was to be a sports anchor and to make it. And I'm, you know, at least in my eyes, at least I got to ESPN and I made it and I accomplished accomplished a lot of the things that I sought out to, and maybe even a little more. So after that, it's like once you achieve something, you ask, well, what's next? And you begin to, I kind of outgrew that goal and I felt myself being pulled towards other things. So yeah, I was exploring some of the other schools. And, you know, for the longest time, I was like, I just want one summer to be an athlete again. I just want one summer. Well, you know what? The universe gave it to me. Like, careful what you ask for. They're like, you know, and I think that's like the important thing is from like a spirituality perspective, you know, my parents are Buddhist, but from that perspective, like the aim is not to judge things as good or bad. So the layoff, in societal terms, we think of it as bad. But if you strip away any sort of judgment and just look at it as an event, that to me was helpful. Like, put aside the ego and all that other stuff. It set me free. It did. I wouldn't have had the gumption to leave. And so when I tried to keep that mindset and take away the negative labeling of that event, I was like, that's what I needed. And it did. It's like, it's almost like, you know, it's like the ducks. Where it's like they're floating on the water.
But they're
but underneath they're paddling. And so, and that was, you know, at the time it felt like a huge loss, but really I felt like my life had just begun.
And you said, wow, that's it's amazing to hear you tell that story, but also, and something you said earlier about, you know, being depressive, being in a dark place, but you are now into psychology and sociology, and you're helping people find themselves after their career. Because this show, when I talk to people about post-career, that could always, you could feel what people are feeling. And you know, those times where they may have, you know, hit whatever that rock bottom looks like, or they just, where they felt like everything was taken away. So the event with ESPN is one, but also sports, which have been a big key for you as well. I know you're now helping, you know, other athletes kind of understand how it is post-career, because that's the one thing that you said you had to find. And you even, on the episode that I worked with you found Dr. Parham, who I worked with at UCLA. I mean, you know, it's really cool. So I think, was that your therapy? Is that how it was, what helped you from that event, from losing sports to trying to help other people get their mojo back, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they say research is me search, you know, and because everything is so personal. But my journey, I shoved it down for so long about just how tough it was to leave tennis the way I left it, and which is not the way I wanted to leave it. And most athletes aren't able to leave the sport the way they want it. And once I was able to go back and heal and play competitive tennis and kind of recorrect some of the things that some of the mistakes that I had made in the past, I was able to heal. And through that healing process, I was like, wow, because I'm able to get myself out and I understand that story, I really believe I understand how it hurts other people. And I also understand that I can also help other people. I'm a firm believer that in order to understand other people's story, you have to understand yours first. And so that was a huge piece of my journey. And that's what the whole show, The Next Chapter with Prim Seripaprat, is about. It's just about life transitions. You know, I use sport as a vehicle to talk and connect with people and talk about life. But in general, you know, transitions are the focal point, and including, you know, walking away from sport, which is most of the time not easy for any of us.
What's been the most rewarding thing around that? Because that's the one thing that I always, you know, when you talk to people about that transition, and I always tell them it was the hardest thing that I can remember, you know, in my life at that point in time. What has it been for you to have those conversations with people, whether they played, you know, a long career, short career, you know, any of those things? What have been the learnings for you out of that?
Yeah, I learned, I try to be open, and I've learned from every single person that I've interviewed. You, Vilma, Gabby Reese, Andy Roddick, Walter Powell, NFL player, gosh, you name it. Chene Ogwumike, Shamika Holdsclaw, every single person that I've talked to, everybody has shed light on what allowed them to transition, good or bad, struggle or not. And it's been just eye-opening. I feel very lucky to be able to learn. And also, it's been such a wonderful privilege that people would sit down with me. And, you know, I think I've interviewed 50 people, and I've had to reach out to every single person. So this was not done. I have producers, but I don't have a talent producer. So I got every single person that was on the show. And the problem was when we We started it in last July, I believe. So I had about 3-4 months. Things had gotten delayed. I had about 3-4 months to just crush all these interviews. And it was such a panic. I was like, I had a moment where I was like, shoot, I don't know if I can do this. Like, what if people don't respond? Like, you know, and I don't know if you've played that role of reporter where you have to chase people and text them and call and email. And if they don't respond, you're like, they hate me. They don't like me. They think I'm stupid. They think I'm so stupid. That's like, you know, it was so hard. So Doug Baldwin. So I feel so honored that people would respond to that. And not just that, but be able to open up and share so much about their childhood and their journey. Because that's the essence of it. Like, sports isn't just about here. It's all of us. Like, you know, and our childhood and our life journey and our family dynamics impact who we are as an athlete and vice versa. So that was the most beautiful thing, is like, and I still stay in touch with a lot of these. Josh Childress, you know, and you know, him sitting down with me and sharing his struggles with anxiety and social anxiety for the first time. Doug Baldwin talking about his depression. You know, we haven't released it yet, but Greg Oden talking about a lot of the things that he experienced, a former, you know, NBA #1 overall NBA pick. So that's been the most beautiful thing, really.
Yeah, I mean, I hope people can listen to it. It's a podcast. It's just been really good, and it was really good talking to you and kind of telling my story, because a lot of times you kind of remember those things. You only pick certain things, and usually you pick the good. And then when you start digging into the things that hurt you the most, or the things that didn't help, or you were negative, or maybe even were detrimental to you, when you start looking at that, it just really opens you up and makes you understand how to be vulnerable, how to do different things and how to approach it. You know, it's just like I told you, after that, I knew this would be a perfect platform for people, because when you talk to folks, they, you know, just like you were saying, there's a lot of good, and you're happy about things, but there's still some hurt that you're dealing with. There's some trauma that you're dealing with, that it comes to light, and you can really, it's just amazing to me that guys and ladies can still perform at a high level, even in spite of all that. And that's the thing, you know, that to me is what I'm intrigued by, your next phase, when you're helping these young folks get through being as whole as they can, but also being the best athlete or the best person that they can be as well. How does that look for you when you're doing your research and going to school now?
It's powerful, man. Yeah. I'm only into my second summer session too. So this is my third and fourth classes, and I feel like I already a changed person in 3 weeks. It's been really eye-opening, because I think it's so important to be armed with knowledge. Like, knowledge is power, right? And to be able to meld the two worlds between practical and the athletic, but also the world of academia. And the world of academia is armed with scientific, real research that's been conducted. And to be able to have platform and meld all these things together has been really powerful. And I think that, you know, a lot of my work is going to be making sure, with regards to dealing with athletes, is making sure parents and also the systems that we work with and that have an influence on developing these kids I want to make sure that they are trained on developing the child as a person, not just an athlete. And so, you know, that's a whole different conversation, but it has to start when they're young, because by the time they're in high school and college, you know, and especially in, you know, at the pro level, we see a lot of these athletes maybe getting into some trouble off the field. Well, didn't start there. It starts all the way back. And some of it stems from their childhood, especially if they grew up in a disadvantaged situation and went through some serious trauma, which is something that we talked about. I mean, Marcellus Wiley, one of the most accomplished people in the sports media space, saw 3 of his uncles die. Like 2 of them were killed in gang violence in Compton, and 1 of them committed suicide. So when you talk about those things and you dig into that, then it makes sense why things would manifest itself later on. So I think that's, you know, that's going to be some of my future work.
Well, this morning, it's interesting. Jason Wilson, who I follow, and he's got a book, Cry Like a Man. He was showing a video of him and his son working, and his son couldn't quite get what he was trying to do. And, you know, he was just working with him on some boxing, and he started crying. He said, "What's wrong with you?" And the son was like, "I can't get it right." In essence, you know, I'm just kind of paraphrasing. And he said,
Yeah.
"Hey, this is the first time you've done it. Don't worry about it. That's why we're doing it." So he shows him as a little kid, and then he's older now, like a teenager, and boom, he's just going to it. And that's the thing. I think you know, when I think about that, if you're armed with the things to help you not do or repeat what you've seen, you will be so much better. Not saying, and the first thing I did when I got up was I texted my son and sent him that clip saying, sometimes I wish I could go back and do some of those things as opposed to trying to say, be harder or do this. And it was just kind of eye-opening when you look back on things as a parent or you know, an adult, when you look back at some of the things that you wish you could change. And even if you can't, how can you make whatever it is better? I think is what, you know, and I think what you're trying to do with athletes, both male and female, is going to be really good for them, and, you know, in approaching their sport.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think the whole, you know, whether it's dealing with athletes and transitioning away from sport, whether it's dealing with the political climate, whether you're a parent and trying to raise your child in a very racially aversive climate right now, I think a lot of it just has to do with self-reflectiveness. I mean, and self-awareness. And I think that's going to be the most important thing. And that's a really hard thing to do, because in order for us to instill progress and change, that means we have to look at ourselves and also look at where we were wrong. And that's also been painful for me, because it's like, it starts with us, you know, and I have to look at myself and say, where was I not educated? But it's also a starting point, right? It's like, I haven't had these conversations with my parents. I have questions about our culture and some of the things that are said in Asian culture, Thai culture, why colorism still exists. And so I had to address that. And so it starts with, I think, me becoming more educated about this. I have to use myself as the guinea pig, and I have to put the microscope on myself. I talk to my family, I talk that through, and then that's where it starts. So I hope a lot of people are being encouraged. I'm curious what the process has been for you, Seabuck. Like, has this shed light on anything where, areas where you haven't thought about or touched on before?
Yeah, it has. It's really been, for me, a couple of things. Not just looking at it from the black male perspective, but the black female or the female perspective of when you see some of these things that are happening and what's going on in the world. I think that's really helped me try to understand, you know, how my mother or my wife or my daughter or my aunts would feel if they saw me in the sense of George Floyd, or if I was Ahmaud Arbery, because I so much would think about it from a black male perspective. And sometimes that's not, you know, that's not good to them, because think about all the times that they're waiting for their son or daughter or, you know, their kids or brother or sister, you know, come home. So it's really made me examine that even closer, because, you know, now that I think about it, you see Breonna Taylor, you see these people that have, and we've known that that's existed. It's not like it's new, but it's just given me insight into the struggle of people of color, especially black people, but a black female, and what that's like for black males and females, and some of the challenges. So yeah, it got me to think, how can I be better in talking to my daughter about these things, as opposed to spending that time that I did with my son. Now that she's home, we're here together and we're able to have great conversations, go for a walk and talk about, you know, just societal things, but just her life. What does she think? How does she view the world? Which has been very eye-opening for me, but also very good. And I think spiritually, I needed that.
Yeah, I think it's such a, you know, I'm somebody who likes to believe that things happen for a reason. And how ironic is it that the time when we're all at home, forced to be with our families, maybe more than we would like.
Yeah, exactly.
But this happens at a time when all these other issues, although they've always been there, are really coming to the forefront. And because of the time, and because we're all working from home, many people have been laid off, you know, and so many unfortunate situations, but we have the time to pour ourselves into this topic.
Yeah.
I just think it's actually, it's been really hard, because you saw my tweet, I think it was yesterday. It's been really hard. I wake up mad and angry and sad because I realize how divisive our country has become. But it's also, when I'm able to look at it through that lens, I think that I'd like to think that things really happen for a reason.
Yeah, I agree with you. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with Chopping It Up with Buck.
How you guys doing? It's Artavis Scott here. The reason why I like Thin Energy is because I need to be at my peak performance no matter what I do. Big sports drink for me, you know, keep it going, keeping myself up. It gets me on top of my game, extra boost that I need to keep it going in the fourth quarter. Working out, definitely a good drink for you to have. All the good nutrition that you need inside of it. Passion fruit, it's my favorite one. It's not just for professional athletes, it's for everyone. And I definitely can say it definitely works in the office or in the weight room, wherever you may be. You can go to thinenergy.com, tell them I sent you, and get you a drink. Thin Energy, the healthy alternative. Drink it, live it. See, if I got something like that, I can just go. No sugar, no crash.
Thin Energy. We're back on Chopping It Up with Buck. Prim, you know, before the break, we were really talking about social justice and the things that we kind of learned about ourselves. What has all this meant to you? You know, now that we have a chance to be at home and you can see it, and you're even saying that some of the things that you're starting to look at and view, and people coming by you calling you the N-word, or just, you know, things that we know, the vicious, disgusting things that are out there. How has that changed your mindset, especially with the little one, your family, you know, all of those different things now that you have to look at and take into account?
I'm reflecting on my experience as a minority and brown-skinned female. First, that's the first thing, is I'm just examining my own experience, something that I really didn't realize that I had really shoved down for so long. You know, I've told you, Buck, that I'm a firm believer in therapy. I still go to therapy. I've been with my therapist for about, I'd say 8 years. And for the first time, or 8 or 9 years, I had a conversation with her about the racial issues that are coming up to the surface, and some of the things that I experienced as an Asian American growing up in the Midwest. Some of the things that we were studying about in my multicultural class, minority identity models, Asian American identity models, that talks about like the way people try to assimilate into white mainstream culture. I mean, my gosh, I just looked down at this paper. I was like, Jesus, like that was me. And so I was shocked that and she noticed it as I was trying to, like, I talked about it and I would try to move. And she was like, wait, what is that? What are you feeling? And I've been so conditioned to move on from it and push through it and ignore it, because that's all you can do. When I was growing up in Missouri, and you know that you're different, and I didn't really get picked on, but you just certain things that people point out that make you feel bad. And, you know, your hair, black hair, you're so dark, all this other stuff. It makes you feel really low, and different, and you don't fit in. And so she held on to that and forced me to face that, and all of that just came up to the surface. And so that was really, you know, that was really painful, and that led to me having a conversation with my parents. I've yet to have a conversation with my mom about some things too. So that was really important for me. But, you know, long story short, it begins with me, and then you know, raising a biracial kid, and also the work that I'm doing now in psychology. I'm really re-examining about what my life purpose is, and what is my role in trying to change things, systemically, more importantly.
What do you think about, I think this is fascinating, all the young athletes that are starting to speak out, you know, on the college level, and even, you know, professionally, you kind of expect that. There's some really strong vocal guys, but I'm watching it more in college, even down to the high school level. And I think that's just fascinating, because in the past, you would always think, well, if I speak out, My scholarship is in jeopardy. I may not get an opportunity to play at the next level. What do you think about that? I'm happy and fascinated with it, but I also curious to see how these guys continue to find their voice, or ladies as well.
I think the future lies in the next generation. I think, for us, and that's something that I try to be aware, as you get older and you're like, oh, we're wise, we're mature, we know what we're talking about. But the older you get, the more bitter you get. And sometimes the more, and you become conditioned, you become a product of the machine. And the beauty about kids, since you have kids and seeing the little ones, and they look at everything with a clean slate. And so there are no restrictions in the things that they are doing or seeing. I think social media has allowed them to connect and develop a voice at a very young age. So my nieces, if you have a phone, and although they're a little bit different, but a lot of people, if you have an Instagram account, or you're aware of, or you're looking at TikTok. Unfortunately, my son has been exposed to TikTok.
Oh, man.
I did not do that. But when
blame it on your husband.
I'm definitely going to blame it on my husband.
I know you are. I'm trying to take up for him. Hey, no.
He'll appreciate that. He'll send you a thank you card later. But even just like that exchange, my son looking at TikTok and seeing other people with their own brand and ownership and expression. Expression is very important in social media. And that's why I think we're seeing so many kids, including athletes, like Coco Gauff is 16 years old, and she's standing out in front of like a crowd of 100 people, like leading this protest. I mean, it is cool. Crazy. It's so unbelievable.
But it's like we saw this in the civil rights movement. It was led by young people, and it was a groundswell of older folks that got involved. But I think what's different now is you're seeing people of all colors and all over the world that are saying, look, this is not right. And no matter how you try to spin it, you can't do that. So I think that's the beauty of this. And age groups, you got, grandmothers, if they feel safe, or grandfathers, adults going out, you got young kids. They're all kind of coming together and trying to do it in a way of saying, no, we have to make this change. We have to have a change if this is going to be a better world. And I think that's the thing for me that's been the most impactful and powerful thing that I can remember, as watching, not having grown up in the 60s, but being right at the tail end of that, and now watching how these young kids are becoming, growing into their own voice, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, the conversation has to change, because don't forget, for example, our son is biracial. My husband is white. I'm Asian American. The number of biracial couples and biracial kids have doubled and more. I would say over the last 20 years, I think it has been. So I forgot I think Time Magazine did this makeshift cover where they predicted, like, this is what 2050 is going to look like. I think that's what they did. But essentially everybody was ethnically ambiguous. Yeah. And that's the thing, all these different cultures colliding. The conversation has to change because of, my son's generation and the generation after that, everybody is going to be a little bit of something. Yeah. So just for that sheer nature, the divisiveness has to change because everybody is literally a blend of so many things now.
That's true. So what's the coolest thing about your son? What is he doing now that's just like, wow, as a proud mom, having a little baby boy? What's the coolest thing when you and your husband look and say, oh, man, this is really cool?
He's very fast. There's a reason why I called him Squirmy at 2 weeks old. I mean, he's gonna be small, but he's gonna be fast. And he's only a little over a year and a half, and we gave him a scooter, and he flies on that. He's not even 2, and he flies on that thing, and he's learning how to count already. He knows how to say words. I do think that he's a little bit different in the sense of, I'm not going to be that parent that's like, oh, my child is prodigious and going to be I'm not going to do that. But I do think that he is he's very independent, and is somebody who's going to be very sure of what he wants. Like, he's somebody that's like, nope, no meatballs. I want that. I want this.
He's decisive.
I don't want that. He's extremely decisive. And so our babysitter and nanny, she says, that is very unique at this age where he's like, yes, yes, nope, don't want to do that. Nope, yes.
There's no
So
in between. It's either yes or no.
But I think like being a parent is interesting because it makes you reflect on your own childhood as you're going through it. And so I think it's cool to experience that and go through the moment and remember things from what I saw or maybe what I experienced, and know that, progress is about tweaking some things. And so I realized like things that may have not worked in the past with past generations. And so I will gladly talk to them about skin color and what's appropriate. And I know what not to say, especially when it comes to body image, somebody who suffers from an eating disorder. Like, before I say something about myself, if there's any like body image shaming or fat shaming others, that's no. And so that's been a cool thing. We're all going to make mistakes, but I'm hoping that the work that, we're doing will pay off, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, Prim, we got a thing we do at the very end called the 2-minute drill. Thanks for that. I mean, it's been so good to catch up with you and just kind of hear.
So good.
Yeah. It's always good to see you and talk to you. But we do a thing called the 2-minute drill because you got to score here, right? We're thinking football.
I hope
terms.
I can score.
Well, these questions are going to allow you to score. How's
okay?
Yeah,
I like to win. I like to achieve. So let's make it easy.
Well, the first one. What's the music you're listening to right now? What's in the Apple Music, Spotify, or whatever you have as your download choice? What are you listening to right now?
I listen to a lot of things. It's probably a mix of like pop. I'm horrible at like knowing the names and artists these days. Like there's so much, but it's definitely a mix between like pop, techno, and rap and hip hop. Okay. So pop and hip hop. Yeah. Like that's it. Cool. That's my jam. And a little house.
Okay, cool. Where's your favorite place to eat? When you can get back out there? I know we can't now.
But I was going to say at home.
Yeah, besides at home, when you're the first place you can go once this thing is over and you feel like you can sit inside and have a good meal, where is that going to be?
Well, we just moved to Hoboken, so I don't really know a lot of the places. I was watching something yesterday, it was a travel show, and I'm like, gosh, it'd be so nice to just get out and go somewhere and just go to a bakery. Yeah. I want to go to a bakery, have a cup of coffee and like some baked goods and just sit there like a normal person without a mask. Yeah. I don't know if that will ever happen.
Like a coffee and a bakery shop.
Yeah.
This stuff.
Pizza.
Yeah.
Pizza. I'm down for pizza any day.
Oh man. Well, I love pizza too. So you got to tell me some good ones in that area. So if I ever get there, I'll know where to find them. Hey, the other one, real quick, you're moving down to Feel Easy now. I told you these are easy things to help. Yeah, we're on about the 50
2 steps forward, 5 steps back.
No, you're doing fine. Hey, the other thing I have for you is, what was your best tennis win ever?
Oh gosh, I don't know I don't want to say no one knows her because then that would be demeaning to her, but her name was Laura Granville and she was #1 in the country. It was that Easter Bowl tournament that I talked about. And I was down 6-love, 2-love, and she was the #1 seed. All the college coaches were there and it was front and center. And I was seated, but it was a round of 16. Yeah. I was down 6-love, 2-love. I mean, at that point in your career, like the last time I got bageled was maybe when I was 9. So the fact that I lost the first set, 6-love, I won a game and I looked at my dad. I was like, yay, I got a game. This is embarrassing. I came back and I beat her. And then I had a couple more upsets after that. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, we're down almost to the 20-yard line. We're getting in the scoring zone.
All right.
What's your best moment as a broadcaster? What's one of your best moments as a broadcaster?
I mean, the Miami Heat situation that Kevin, your producer, mentioned. That was 10 years ago. The Miami Heat one where I come out in like black and white zebra pants and like some sparkly sequin top. So other than the Miami Heat dancer tryout in 2011.
You gotta laugh at yourself sometimes, but other than
plenty to laugh about, too. Plenty. it wasn't one moment, but I will say that I think launching our radio show with Spain and Prim.
Yeah.
That was really awesome. And even though I was only a part of it for, I think it was like 6-7 months, but just to be a part of that, when things were changing and shifting and there were more female voices coming on, I appreciate ESPN and ESPN Radio giving us that opportunity. It was the first, what we believed, I think, was the first all-female, produced and co-hosted by females in broadcasting, sports broadcasting history. So that was awesome.
That's cool. Well, we got a touchdown there. That's a score.
Yay!
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, see, you have so many different things you can go with. That's why I give it. I leave it wide open. But I'll say this, Prim. I really appreciate you coming on. It's been great having you. We're gonna have you back. You know what? We may need to do an old school Buck and Prim, and then we interview people. Because you can come on here anytime. I mean, you're always welcome, and you're much better at interviewing people than I am. I just.
Seabuck. No, it's been, I love you to death. We always have a good time.
Yeah.
We always have a good time. So on that note, I'm going to have to bring you back onto my show and maybe we can do a little sequel. Oh, I have to tell you, I don't know sorry, you're Kevin.
No, he's fine. No, he's not.
Dr. Parham, when you mentioned that Dr. Parham, who is now the MBPA mental health director, and he's been a mentor of mine. And for those that don't know the story, was a big piece of, it was at UCLA that you worked with Dr. Parham, the sports.
Yeah. And I'll tell you want me to tell the story real quick? Yeah. So I was at UCLA and, doing well, but I had a couple of practices. I was really struggling and just couldn't catch the football. And that was my forte. I could catch a football. I still can catch now. You wake me up and throw something at me, I'm going to catch it. But I was just struggling with it and other things just were manifest. And I don't think it was actually football I was struggling with. It was other things. So I went to see him, and I didn't have a lot of sessions with Dr. Parham, but the times that I went to him, it was just so insightful, and it made me understand the need for having somebody to help you occasionally, or if you get into those ruts or you get into a situation. And it was real simple stuff that he did with me, but it was amazing. My career really took off after that because you're so focused on thinking if I don't perform, I'm going to lose my job. And I was more afraid of being successful than even more afraid, fear of failure. But I was also not allowing myself to be successful. And he just really opened that up in me. And it was helpful even throughout my pro career, even after I finished playing. So I'm on her show, Prim's show, and she's, and hey, we got to get you on. I think, so we're talking. And all of a sudden, she brings out Dr. Parham. So that was really cool. I mean,
and you guys haven't talked in how long?
We hadn't talked in years. I mean, it had been, golly, maybe 15, 16 years since I had talked to him. And that was, yeah. I mean, you got me. I was like, whoa.
This is so good. Yeah, it was so fun to connect you guys. And he has become a mentor of mine in the mental health space. And he's, worked with the Kobe Bryants of the world and Lakers and the NFL and all this other stuff. And then I'm taking my multicultural class, and who is in my textbook? His brother, Dr. Thomas Parham, who is huge within the Afrocentric psychology realm. And the two of them, as African-American males in the world of psychology over the last, I would say, maybe 40 years, are both pioneers and trailblazers. I mean, I knew Dr. Parham was huge, but then learning about his brother and the both of them, that was really cool. So I did my little assignment on Dr. Thomas Parham, his brother. So that was cool. I was like, I got to tell Seabuck.
He is so cool. You don't realize how he gets to. I mean, some people can, say they're cool. He's the epitome of cool. It's like a jazz musician with, just eating, like the old guys that have the smooth gear on. He knows how to get out of you what you think, no, I'm not going to let you have it. And he just opens you up. And I was so thankful that you brought him on, and I still keep in touch with him now. So I'm glad that
you do. Great. Oh my gosh, I love it.
I'm glad that you connected us. But that's wild.
That's awesome. I love it.
Well, thanks again for coming on this edition of Chopping It Up with Buck. Prim, you're always welcome. You can come back, and no matter if Kevin's telling me to break, we'll go through the break, and we'll just keep having these open and honest conversations like that we always do.
It'll be fine.
Producer, smooser, whatever. But thanks again. You have a good one, and we'll have you back again soon. Take care.
Sounds good. You too.
Hi, I'm Mike Gardner, founder of Thin Energy, the wellness energy that delivers each and every time.
In 6 weeks that I've been taking Thin Energy, I feel fantastic.
I lost 7 pounds in the first week.
You just squeeze it in, you take a shot, and you're done.
Get your drinks, get you hype, get you ready.
I feel great.
Jump on, try Thin Energy.
Drink it, live it.
Many people are looking for natural alternatives to help ease their aches and pains. Begin stopping the pain with the help of Pain Stopper. Formulated by healthcare providers, Pain Stopper helps alleviate a variety of physical ailments so you can get back to doing what you love. Our products are triple independently lab tested to ensure the highest quality hemp available. Visit PainStopCBD.com for more information. Pain Stopper, because why manage pain when you can stop it?
At Heslop Wealth Advisors, our goal is to help small businesses develop quality retirement plans for their employees through our Lunch and Learn seminars. We provide lunch and learning tools to help your company succeed and unmatched customer service.